just like to thank Tim for giving me this invitation to come here today to make this presentation on drug-related litter, and also to thank you guys for coming along. It is a pleasure to be here, and hope you get something out of today. Just before I start, just say a little bit about my background. I'm a sort of social scientist with an anthropological and sociological background. I'm currently at the University of Huddersfield, having spent the last 5 or 6 years in Plymouth, where all of this research was conducted at Plymouth. At Huddersfield, I'm basically writing up more of that research. And that nature of that research was street-based injecting from a harm reduction perspective, and I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. With regard to the actual presentation, if we could sort of keep it so that the questions come at the end, and then we can sort of go through individual questions then. Mainly just you know, so I can get through it all, because I've got quite a lot of material here, which I've planned for about an hour. So bear with us. Okay, so we'll get started, and the aims of this presentation really are to provide an overview of the key issues associated with drug-related litter, to explain the rationale or the reasons for drug-related littering, why people do it, to summarise various recommendations that have been made for managing drug-related litter, and then, as an addition to that, to summarise the empirical research, my research, that addresses the management of drug-related litter and drug-using environments in street-based settings. In addition, what we hope to do is provide some kind of harm reduction-related framework for managing drug-related litter in community settings, based on findings and recommendations I've made previously. And to conclude, what I'd like to do is to clarify the actual threat associated with drug-related litter. But first, I'd just like to have a moment's reflection on litter, the issue of litter, and people's attitudes towards that. Litter is it's characteristic of people's attitudes, which can be by people and so on. So the top one, just think about recycling protocols relating to bottles, to plastic, to paper, and all the various bins that are available in various households, and all of the expectations communities and individuals are expected on how to manage their own litter. Recently I was told off in my town block for using the wrong form of plastic bag, for putting it in a refuse bin. Cigarette butts, because of the smoking ban, think of all the tab ends, the filters that you see on the streets, living in the street. Stand outside a bar, you've got a bin right next to where you stand, yet people continuously throw cigarette butts on the floor. Alcohol-related glass bottles in street-based settings. My colleague up in Glasgow, Caledonian University, Alistair Forsyth, he's done a lot of work on this type of issue, on how glass bottles can influence various injuries. It's street-based violence. Chewing gum. Here's a few interesting statistics about chewing gum. It costs London, to clean the streets of London, £10 million every year to clean the streets of chewing gum. Each little piece costs about 50 pence, £2 to clean it. To clean the entire length of Oxford Street in London, it's about 3 months to clean it completely. You need 300,000 pieces of chewing gum. And also, if you think about chewing gum, if you think it's the actual act of spitting as well, every piece that you see is someone who's been spitting in that particular place. What you make of that, some still your own opinion, but this is an issue related to that. Canine feces, there's a lovely one. More statistics, there are probably about 8 million dogs in the UK producing on a daily basis 1,000 tonnes of excrement. Consider that. And this is a very serious issue from a public health point of view, probably understated, because associated with dog excrement is a an infection called toxocariasis, which is caused by roundworm infections of the dog. And that can transmit particularly to young children aged 18 months to 3 years. And symptoms of this include various eye disorders, dizziness, nausea, asthma, and extremely rare cases, seizures and fits. So this is a very serious issue, and also there is a public health expectation that people will pick up dog waste with plastic bags and put in an appropriately sited bin. So I think in these various issues, you can probably see a connection, probably see a pattern with drug-related litter. There's an expectation that people will clear up the litter, and there's also the reality that litter does take place. And I think drug-related litter in this sense reflects society's wider attitudes to litter. So I'm sure everybody here is familiar with the issue of drug-related litter. So just to emphasise it, there's a few images from various sites that I've attended throughout the UK. Starting with the top left, the back alley with 20 wrappers to evidence drug-related litter. Here, so I would call a street-based injecting room, also characterised by cheap cider, tobacco, and various injecting paraphernalia around the seat. Here, another street-based setting. This is the pathway in, and it's just strewn with litter all the way down, alcohol and drug-related. Moving down here, this is several syringes and needles and syringes in a conventional litter bin. But as you can see, there's a clear blood presence there, and this causes tensions within people who have to clean these types of bins because of the sharp's presence. But nevertheless, the irony is drug users are actually using the bin in a legitimate purpose, yet they can't do good for bad. And likewise, here is another street-based setting with just every kind of paraphernalia that's available there. And this setting is a sex work site, 4 condoms and 2 syringes. And as I was putting this together, I realised that the sort of economy associated with this site in this little corner here is about £100 worth. £80 in sexual transactions, £20 in heroin use for syringes. So that's just an aside. The money related to litter is also a reason why people are discarding in the street. Just to emphasise the contentious and political nature of needles and syringes, here's a picture that was taken from Drug Reporter, which is a Hungarian harm reduction site. And this guy here, who's a supporter of harm reduction, and this guy was not a supporter of harm reduction. And he basically took offence at something he said and made his point by showering him with needles and syringes, which seems quite extreme. And last but not least, the issue in words. Here we have a series of newspaper articles that I've taken from provincial papers in the areas that I've worked and some that I haven't worked over the last 5 or 6 years. For the moment, if we just look at the headline of each one, we want the junkies out from the Plymouth Herald. Jamie 5, pricked by needle, Plymouth Herald. 5-year-old boy who sucked on a discarded hypodermic needle faces test for HIV and hepatitis. At the top, used needles found in post boxes, police sites and flag tippers, litter bug addicts in Blackheath. And at the bottom corner there, shoppers top 3 finds needle in West Hall. Sorry guys, but it doesn't stop there. Next page, top of the column there, addicts get special bills for needles. Used needles found on route to a school I can't pronounce. On the right, junkies terrorising pensioners in town centre. And finally, I found this one relating to the streets of Cork in the Irish Examiner. Children at risk from discarding needles. If we could just go back for a moment, and if you take note of the words in red, I think these words are, emphasise the point from a media point of view. You've got words such as angry, rounded on, sick, suspected, addicts. A lot of emphasis on the use of children, typically under 5. Always inevitably mention of HIV, hepatitis, drug-related infection. Addicts, trouble, pinpoint, horrified, nearly at home, very quickly. Forced special containers, somehow making people more marginal by creating special containers. Lifted the lid, serious, school, battling junkies, terrorising, frightening, I'm making a point on it. So when you actually analyse these media reports from national, provincial settings, what you got is a language of conflict. It's us, as in media and society, versus drug users. And the language also infers psychological warfare and the characterised the symbolic language of the war on drugs, using words such as shock, terrorised, anxiety, battling. It also reflects a political anger. Not in my backyard, I don't want these people here, I don't want this rubbish here. Definitions of people and place, I think it's junkie, shooting galleries, so on. Because of that, because of the actual paraphernalia itself, it's regarded as a public health menace, particularly with regard to HIV, AIDS and hepatitis. Furthermore, there's a culture of blame established within these newspaper reports in which drug users are eventually stigmatised for drug use. And finally, there's a moral outrage clearly attached to every one of those articles, in which, from a more theoretical sociological point of view, it concerns issues of purity and impurity, clean people, dirty people. So what does this tell us? Well, actually, that's a rhetorical question, because I think we know what this rhetoric tells us. Basically, drug users are seen as a menace to society. Drug-related litter is seen as a drug-related public health threat, and society should respond accordingly. But those judgments, those values, especially in the media, typically lack evidence. It's very, it's founded upon a sort of moral imperative rather than evidence-based findings. And that's what I'm hoping to do in this session now. So I've set the background, and now I'm going to talk specifically about my work in these types of issues. So it concerns applied research on public injecting drug use, which took place between 2006 and 2011 at the University of Plymouth. The first 3 years was my PhD, my doctoral research, and that was in partnership with Plymouth Drug and Alcohol Action Team, as well as the Economic and Social Research Council of Britain. Subsequent to that, I then did 2 more years postdoctoral research on exactly the same issue. In essence, I repeated the fieldwork I did from a PhD in Barking and Dagenham in London, and then again in Southend in Essex. For the methods for each site, epistemologically framed by harm reduction, basically that means I used harm reduction as the point of focus, the interpretive point of analysis, and sociologically it was theoretically informed by being able to. But the methods, which more significantly involved ethnography, in which I relocated to those particular areas and lived there for extended periods, particularly Plymouth, in which I did street-based observation of injection sites, and also just, by living in that community, see how people respond to drug-related issues. The actual research itself also involved interviewing, all forms of that, so unstructured, semi-structured, ad hoc interviews in the street, and also a great deal of photography and visual methods. photography and video, I'll maybe talk about a bit more later, but all of these forms, these four particular methods, they were used with injecting drug users as well as agency participants. Just to be more specific about numbers, the number of injecting drug user respondents with recent experience of public injecting, as you know, were 71 in total, 169 agency representatives, in which agency representatives were typically frontline service personnel. I use that term to describe people who work in toilets, who work in car parks, who work on the street as outreach workers, drug and alcohol workers, police officers, community safety officers. These types of people who encounter public injecting, street-based injecting on a regular, if not daily basis. As well as that, I also, in total, visited over 400 public injecting sites in four different locations. The reason why I'm telling you this about public injecting is because there's a clear and obvious relationship between public injecting and drug related. Just out of interest, the visual database includes over 1,000 images and over an hour of video material gathered over the last 5 or 6 years. Okay, so moving on to why people inject in public places. Both my research and previous research basically confirms that there are 4 key reasons why people inject in street-based settings. First and foremost, it relates to insecure housing. Or as a user might say, there's nowhere else to go because of living on the street, living in hostels or with friends and so on. As a result of drug dependency, as a user might say, as a result of instant gratification. I need to get the drugs into me as quickly as possible. Third, as a result of withdrawal symptoms, related to number 2, but it's more to do with when I'm rattling, when I'm clubbing. Fourth, place-based opportunity, and that relates to using a public toilet because that particular toilet happens to be next to the drug market, next to the drug seller, and even in a nearby setting, or near to a needle and syringe program, related to sex work, or possibly as a result of opportunistic contact with a friend, a colleague, a peer, so on, in the street. So who are public injectors? Well, again, based on the multi-site study, there's no definitive answer to this, but a particular profile does emerge when we look at the socio-demographic material of public injectors. So when we collapse the IDU sample, typical male respondent is aged in the mid-30s, white British, from that particular local area. You typically be unemployed, have experience of ruthlessness, and currently be homeless. So by that I mean in a hostel or staying with friends. And will have spent time in prison as a result of a drug-related offence. Typical female was very similar to this, a little bit younger, white British, also local, also had experience of ruthlessness, currently homeless, unemployed, and have some limited experience in sex work. However, the most defining feature of this profile is the average injecting career. Long careers with an average of 14 years injecting, in which the average injecting career for a street-based injector would be 15 years, 8 years for a female. And previous research in Australia, Shane Dark, he suggests that street-based injecting is part of the natural history of an injector's career. So basically what he's saying is that at some point in time, further down the line, an injector will eventually start injecting in street-based settings. Where are public injecting sites? Well, basically they are everywhere. But the importance and the essence of public injecting sites is the secrecy and concealment attached to often very public places. Sites will be typically hidden in open view because despite the media attention drawn to drug-related public injectors themselves are not exhibitionists. They don't want people to see what they're doing. So sites will include toilet cubicles, doorways, rooftops, within bushes, stairwells, and behind screens. I haven't included any pictures of injecting sites here because I'm pretty sure you'd be familiar with the type of setting that we're talking about. And an earlier slide did see an indication of what they were. But I thought I'd also take this opportunity just to talk a little bit about what I've managed to do with that visual material, because I think it is relevant to the issue of drug-related litter. So as I said, I've visited several hundred injecting sites, taken pictures of them, and with all of that, and in conjunction with the interview data and talking to agency representatives, injecting drug users, what I've managed to do is create a very fancy sociological term for a very simple idea: continuum of descending safety. And basically it's just categorising all of those injecting sites into one of three very different categories. So category A is typically a controlled injecting site. And by control I'm talking about the way in which that environment has been manufactured, made, and built for a specific purpose. Essentially we're talking about toilets. All of these represent category A toilets. And it's also important to emphasise that I'm creating this categorisation based on the practice and principles of harm reduction. So within these sites, you see limited opportunities for users to be able to apply and practice some form of harm reduction. So disabled access toilet, a very spacious setting with a lot of space for preparing drugs. You've got access to running water. You've maybe even got an alarm code in case of emergency. You've got mirrors. You've got well lit. You've got a lot of lights and basically well lit. This moves down. Oh yeah, and disabled access toilets are typically cleansed on a more regular basis because of the nature of the toilet that it is. So very rarely will you walk into one of these toilets and it's characteristic of what you would see in these types of toilets, namely tissue on the floor, urine on the floor, possibly stains on the bowl that would be unpleasant, vomit, all these types of things. So this is starting to represent the descending safety aspect from a harm reduction perspective of the types of environment in which toilets represent in the setting. So at the bottom here we have blue light areas, and conversations with Tim over the last couple of days have found that blue lights aren't necessarily an issue in Ireland, but in the UK they're becoming more and more popular as a form of preventing drug use from taking place. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. But moving on to category B settings, semi-controlled sites. In here, the control, the harm reduction facility, toilet, water, lights and space and so on, become more reduced. So again, we're going further down the scale, in which there is less opportunity to practice harm reduction. So supervised car parks, there's no running water, there's no safe space, there's no cubicles, there's no form of safety within these spaces. And likewise, unsupervised toilets in more marginal places, more rural places, stairwells in shopping centres, stairwells in multi-storey car parks, stairwells in residential tower blocks, parklands and bushes. These are all characteristic of what I would call semi-controlled sites. Uncontrolled sites, however, are those that lack anything. There's absolutely nothing there to facilitate harm reduction. And these would include phone boxes, behind skips, doorways, rooftops, sites associated with rough sleeping, or opportunistic sites, meeting people in the street. So just to emphasise a little bit more and reiterate what I'm actually talking about, within this continuum, this slide will scale down towards danger. In category A, such as toilets. These are much more hygienic in terms of the cleansing protocols applied to them. They have access to running water, improved lighting, privacy, contact with others, and that doesn't necessarily mean other drug users, it means other people. So in the event of drug-related harm, overdose for example, somebody will be there to help, whether or not they approve of drug use or not. These are static sites, they're always there, the toilet will always be there, it will not move. And as I said, subject to regular cleansing. But that cleansing varies, and that clean space varies throughout all toilets. Category B, overall much more less hygienic. So here we have a level within a multi-storey car park. This particular landing, a lot of people go there on the way home from the bars, using this as a toilet area, so you can imagine the smell. People are injecting here with no running water, very poor lighting, in sites patrolled by police. They're much more exposed. People walking up these steps to the bars, to the shopping centre. Injectors will become exposed. I mentioned earlier that public injectors are not exhibitionists. By coming to this space, they are coming off the street, they're getting away from people, getting out of sight. People that see them is because of their journey towards wherever they're going. So public injectors aren't making a display of what they're doing in these types of places. And these sites are also characterised with all drug-related litter. Clearly, there are drug-related litter. Drug-related litter does occur in toilet environments, but because of the cleansing regimes associated with them, you're less likely to see it than you would here. In category C settings, as I said, phone boxes, opportunistic sites behind skips, these are completely unhygienic. There's no access to running water, they're very concealed. They're almost a sort of random site where people, okay, let's nip into this little alleyway here. That would be. They're more isolated and much more transient. And by that I mean they're associated with rough sleeping sites where people go to sleep and stay. Also, another feature of category B is that these are sites that are recognised by other drug users within that particular community as temporary, safe places to go. So a particular car park, particular bush, you regard it as a safe place to go where people will know that they're not going to get interrupted by the police, by the public. These sites are more to do with individuals or people working as pairs, oppos and so on. So they will go here because it's somewhere they know and somewhere they prefer. So there we have the disabled access toilet, which as one drug user in my study said, this is the Premier League of injection sites. And you can see why. I mean, you can clearly see why. There's a lot of preparation sites there. That was shown out on this. And a lot of safe space. There's an emergency cord. There's even a condom machine there. And in some respects, this could be compared to a safer injection facility. But all of that harm reduction value is diminished and completely removed, made null and void by a locked door that opens into this area. So in the event of drug-related overdose, game over. So although that's the Premier League, it is also fraught with complications that can result in harm and hazard. This one is, for example, the semi-controlled site down towards a site by the river, which is also characterised by effluents from the sewage works present in this water. The lady in question who took me here, she used this tree as a form of holding herself stable while she actually injected. She was more or less leaning into the river. And I think in these three shots you can see the continuum I'm trying to explain here, from hygiene and safety towards dirt and danger. Okay, so I've gone all this way, I've talked all about public injecting, the reasons why people public inject. I and the types of setting in which injection does take place. So now, moving on to the issue of drug-related litter, just start off by explaining a little bit why people may do it. So because street-based injecting obviously involves the use of injecting equipment, drug-related litter is situated within the entire experience of injecting in a street-based setting. Just think back to what I was saying earlier about cigarette butts, about chewing gum, about dog mess. It's about the situated nature of where these people are. And it's about item 4, items handled daily. So in the context of an injector's life, needles, syringes, swabs, coolers, spoons, these are all items that are handled regularly, daily, frequently by individual injectors. You know, sometimes injecting 3, 4, 5, 6 times a day. In the context of their lives, this equipment is not extraordinary. This equipment is not remarkable. It's an aspect, it's equipment that they use every day. Similar to taking your dog for a walk, letting it mess on in the garden, in the park. Similar to people spitting out chewing gum on the street. Similar to people throwing a cigarette butt on the street. Similar to the street drinking on people drinking on throwing a ball. The context is the key to understanding litter. Add to this the concerns about detection and interruption from police and by the public. So if you're carrying equipment that associates you with the possession of an illegal substance, you are going to get rid of that equipment as soon and as quickly as possible. In addition to that, if you're injecting in a street-based setting, you will inject more hastily, you will inject more rapidly, you will inject quickly. Everything is intensified, made much more rapid. It's rushed to you. It's without the care that's required, for harm reduction. And this haste, as I said, is related to avoiding essentially arrest. Because at the end of the day, the idea of injecting in public places is to have your head, go out, work, more money, more drugs, inject again. And it's a cycle in which drug-related litter, go back to that sex work site, more punters, more money, more drugs. More punters, more money, more drugs. Move on to the next place. Now, in addition to that, the very last point, what I've also discussed at great length with many drug users are the indigenous, what I call them the indigenous discarding strategies. And these strategies refer to equipment that has been stashed, dumped, and included in cans, bottles, containers, and so on. And I'm calling it indigenous discarding strategies because these are methods to avoid detection, to avoid arrest, and also to facilitate continued injecting at a future time. So, for example, stashed equipment could well be regarded as drug-related litter in the context of a non-injector's lifestyle. But actually, that equipment, that unused equipment, has been left in a particular bush, behind a particular brick, within a wall, within a hiding behind a bin. It's not necessarily equipment that's been dumped, randomly or maliciously. It's been placed there for a specific reason, for the user to go and work, get the money, come back to that safe place. Likewise, equipment that may have been used and dumped as a result of that speed and haste that I was describing earlier. Get rid of the equipment to avoid strip search that may take place in a police station. In addition to that, if you take it a little bit further, users will talk about discarding equipment in drink cans, plastic bottles, containers, portable sharps boxes. They'll talk about discarding it in toilets and drains, conventional litter bins, and also they'll talk about snapping the pin and leaving the bag. Again, contextualise these rationalities within that injecting experience. Essentially, what they are doing is removing the pin, the sharp, from a public place. By putting it in a can or container, it's neutralised. By putting it in a toilet and drain, it's neutralised. But people subsequent to that act then have to handle that equipment, and that's where tensions arise. Remember the image of the tissue paper stained with blood in the conventional litter bin? Well, again, contextualise this. Somebody's used a bin legitimately, thinking that it's safe, but the local authorities then have to handle that equipment, and again, this causes tension. And snapping the pin, in the more sort of category B sense, the more socially oriented places where injectors will go, people will talk about snapping the pin and leaving it because of the frequency of equipment that's already there. But by snapping the pin, the rationality is that it's stopping needle stick injury from occurring within that site. And the idea is that they are neutralising on themselves. I do accept that there are a lot of other barrels and syringes that have not had the needle snap, and I'm not standing here being an apologist for drug-related litter. What I'm trying to do is explain the rationalities of drug-related litter. Just to emphasise that last point, as I've said, I've taken a lot of photographs of public injector sites and drug-related litter. And I didn't actually realise what I was seeing in images such as this until I'd done the interviews with injecting drug users. So if you look at syringe 1, 2, 3, and I think, yeah, 4. What was that 5? 4 of them anyway. 4 have had the pin removed. 1 has been plunged into the earth. This also is a site in which was characterised by frequent injection on a daily basis by a large number of injecting drug users in a street-based, bushy area. And for me, if you look at the position of these syringes, to me this suggests more than one user has been there. It also suggests that they haven't just been flung down on the ground, they've also been placed, the pin's been snapped off, however, and placed on the ground. Whether they've been sitting on the ground, I don't know. The point I'm trying to make is that in using visual data in this sort of forensic way, you can see that the threat of the pin, the sharps, has been removed, even though it's in a site characterised by injecting drug use. And again, various rationales associated with this by injectors where there was a sort of general consensus that people who discard injecting equipment, regardless of how in what format, there's why do people do this? They couldn't understand it themselves, but this type of behaviour, this sort of removing the pin, was seen as acceptable because it was a way of getting in a site and out of the site, moving on to the